Why did you decide to write this book, and how did you choose this time?
Well, I have been a martial artist for over 55 years. I've been a Kempo instructor for 50 years. And in order to teach adults, one has to establish relevance and validity. So I always used real life experiences that I had had to set up the lesson. Many people had heard it and they would tell me, you need to write a book. And I said, nobody wants to read about this. Well, I was teaching at a seminar for Jeff Speakman in Las Vegas, and Mills Crenshaw, who was a radio talk show host and author, was present, and he made it his mission to extract a book from me, and so we collaborated on this, and that's how it came about.
Why did you include the details about the periods when you worked in the jail and on patrol?
Well, most people, their only perception of law enforcement and police work is what they see on television. What they don't understand is that undercover work has very, very little to do with police work. Really, an actor would be a much better undercover officer, but it has to be a police officer to build a prosecutable case and to maintain the integrity of the chain of evidence. So I was selected. There were a number of officers who their nose was out of joint because they had more time in the department than I did, and claimed they had more experience, but experience on the street and in the jail doesn't parlay into undercover work. So I put that in there to establish that I was a police officer. I worked in the jail, I worked on the street, but narcotics was something entirely different.
How did you feel when the girl overdosed at the drug dealer's apartment and all you could do was watch her die?
I felt sick to my stomach. What an incredible waste of life and human potential. People ask me, why didn't you just go ahead and blow your cover and call an ambulance and get her there? I didn't have the manpower to take everybody in the place into custody. That would have been a disaster. And there's more to it than just the drug dealers and the drugs coming in from Mexico and elsewhere. It's America's insatiable appetite for drugs. And there's no telling that she wouldn't have just turned around and done the same thing the next weekend. There was nothing I could do, and I'm sick about it.
How did you find out all the details about Kaminsky?
Well, Floyd Kaminsky was a cold-blooded killer, a calculated assassin, but he was shot up pretty bad, and he knew he was going to die. And even someone that cold and calloused wanted company. They wanted to talk to somebody through their demise. And he knew that our detectives would continue to come visit him, talk to him, as long as he was answering questions and giving information. He gave a lot of information right up to, but he would not inform on any mafia people. But during that time, he laid out, he considered himself to be the best there was in his business. And that was what he wanted his legacy to be. So he went over and over what his plan was to kill me, which was, he considered that to would have been one of his masterpieces. Well, he gets his legacy told in this book.
How and why did you get into Kempo karate, and why do you still practice and teach after over 50 years?
I started at a young age because I learned that the world it can be a pretty mean place, tough place, and can be even tougher, when you have curly blonde hair and rosy cheeks and blue eyes. And I found that when I got into combatants, I was pretty good in boxing, mediocre in wrestling and judo. But when I started learning Kempo, I came to realize that my potential to change the conditions of any dangerous situation were almost limitless. And so I could change the conditions of the conflict to my advantage. And I started teaching, and it became a passion. I always say nobody ever comes back to me that I put in prison and says, Ted, thanks for arresting me. That 15 years I did in prison really, really helped me and changed my life. But there isn't a day there isn't a week that goes by that I don't hear from somebody, now that we've got the internet, who was at one time a student of mine and says, Ted, thanks. The confidence I got from studying from you enabled me to do this, that, and the other thing. and it's impossible to stop.
Why did you include the story about the snake in the pool and swimming under the Golden Gate Bridge?
Well, people often don't realize that there are situations where an officer has to make a decision just using his own judgment, which is actually most of the time. And sometimes it's a good decision, sometimes it's a bad decision. Blowing that snake apart in the pool was not a good decision. But it worked out. I wanted to show that police officers do other things. Swimming under the Golden Gate Bridge, one of the dumbest things I ever did, but all my friends were doing it and we had a good time. I'll never do anything like that again.
During some of the more life-threatening situations, the tempo of your voice accelerates. Yet during the Bo Mosley fight, where the giant picked you up and slammed you onto the hood of the police car, you were calm and your voice steady. How is that different?
Well, in the life-threatening situations which involved firearms, where we were exchanging fire, all of your skill, even your skill as a marksman, can be negated by one lucky shot. It's something that you can't control, and I had to relive those situations, not only writing the book, but in this this narration, reading it. And my mind, when I was reiterating it, didn't know the difference, and I was right back there. With Mosley, yeah, he was big, he was very, very strong, he was a giant, but I had done martial arts all my life. The principles didn't change just because he was big. The only thing that changed was the margin for error. If I didn't get it right, and that's what happened. He got a hold of me, kicked me up over his head. He was going to slam me to the ground, but threw me onto the police car that was arriving. That was just another day at the office. But with Kaminsky, and especially after the chilling details that the detectives revealed to me about what his plan was for me, I lived that all over again, and adrenaline released, and I just sped up the tempo of my reading.
Why were the investigators so worried where your first shot, with which you missed in the Kaminsky gunfight, went?
Well, a lot of people don't realize that when there is a situation where the police are involved in a shooting, every bullet has to be accounted for. There are legal and civil ramifications for not finding every bullet. So until that bullet was accounted for, what they would attribute it to is, poor marksmanship. Are you up to date on your range qualifications? If you're not, well, then if there's a civil ramification, it's going to fall back on the officer. So until every bullet was accounted for and they were sure that there was no harm to the public or any individual, they were sweating it out.
What gave you the inspiration to take the goat with you into the drug dealer's pad?
When I was a young man, when we turned 18, we had to register for the draft. And nobody wanted to be drafted, and some people came up with different ways to get out of the draft. But a friend of mine was telling me about someone who walked in with a duck on a leash and into the draft board, and he picked the duck up and it sat on his lap, and they said, "Thank you, you're 4F." And then I heard about another undercover officer. He worked for the state, and he had a 3-legged dog. And the dog walked with this funny gait, and it drew the attention from the drug dealer. If they're focused on you too intently, they might find something, or they might just convince themselves of something about you that's not right. With the goat, the goat was there taking care of the guy's yard work for him, and so I just grabbed the goat. The fact that I was in a suit and tie, because I'd been in court, they required me to go to court when I was undercover with the long hair and the beard, but they still wanted me to wear a suit and tie. So anything I could do to distract him from why I was dressed like that, I thought might work, and the goat just presented itself. Turned out when it got critical and he wanted me to shoot the dope, the goat filled in for me and started eating his sofa.
8210, respond 1071, shots fired, Lincoln and San Carlos. 8210, respond code 3, officer down at the scene.